Hello and welcome back to For Fox's Sake. This is the Women's Football Show with me, Lily Saunders. I'm delighted to have Ellen Ellard here today. She is a sports broadcaster and commentator. Ellen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I guess, you summed it up. I'm sports broadcaster, commentator. I suppose commentating is like my main role. I'm the WSL's or Sky's WSL commentator. So it's dream job. Get to do a lot of watching women's football, commentating on women's football, which has always been the dream. And lucky enough to have watched a fair bit of Leicester over the course of the last couple of months. So looking forward to getting into the topics you have in store, Lily.
Brilliant. A little bit on that, actually, watching Leicester over the last couple of months. Probably not the most ideal season to date, but we did finish with a win this weekend. But what have you made of Leicester's season so far? What are some of the sort of highlights that you've noticed, or maybe some of the shortcomings that we can get our teeth stuck into?
I think there's certainly bits to like about Leicester. I think you have to look at the challenges of the season that started, of course, 10 days before the WSL kicked off in September with the sacking of Amandine Mikel. And I think she was brought in with the idea of it being a longer term project. And you can see what she was starting to build there. You can see the players who, particularly those that have come over from France, the ones that have been selected by her. And I think obviously, it raised a lot of eyebrows, the sacking at the time it happened. And it's always challenging because then you've had a transfer window and opportunities have been missed there. Rick Passmore is a manager who has so much experience in the league, and he's a really experienced head, and he's a really interesting person to watch and to work with. He's old school, and he'll admit that. He'll be the first to admit that himself. He says it as it is. I've worked with players over the course of the last couple of months on co-commentary who have been like, we love him, but he was just he would tell you straight and he'd tell you to your face. And obviously, I think a lot of players really thrive off that. They want honesty. And in a club like Leicester, where particularly the challenges on the men's side financially have been so well documented, you need that honesty. You need that understanding of where the club is. And I think Rick is a really good person to have in this situation, and to, of course, him be then made permanent. They've had some really good individual performances. I think when you isolate some games, the 1-0 victory over Chelsea, I look at in particular, the 1-0 loss to Chelsea, but I look at it as a really good performance. Janina Leitzig that day, she was exceptional. And I know wins have been few and far between, but when you look at the performances like they had against Chelsea, I think there's signs there that there is a good team and that there is a really strong base. And I love watching Yanis Kaiman. You know, she's an exceptional player who's won the Champions League, and Leicester have her, at least for now, at their disposal. I know she's a player who probably doesn't have a huge amount of playing years left in her, but just her as an individual in that squad, she's a great leader and she's a great inspiration for the rest of the squad. And you can use her absolutely anywhere. I mean, coming into that Manchester City game, we had no clue where we were going to put her on our lineups for the game, because we were like, she can play as a striker, she can play on the wings, she can play in midfield, and she can play at fullback, and you know, wherever you could put her everywhere apart from being a goalkeeper. She's excellent. I think obviously the challenges have come with goal scoring. That's always been Leicester's problem since they were promoted. The top scorer in the squad in terms of their career goals in the WSL for Leicester only has 9. So that's a real problem. And I think that's somewhere where they have to look to improve. But as a whole, this season, you look at where Leicester are in the table. I think the table is slightly deceptive sometimes in terms of performances. I think West Ham have potentially had some good performances where they haven't been given points. I think, or not given, haven't won the points that maybe they deserved. I think maybe the same for Liverpool as well at times, even though it's a really challenging one. So I do think that Leicester have a big advantage now. They just need to really solidify, take on the next half of the season, and if they can do some business in January, that would be great. But Rick Passmore said, he's looking at it in a more holistic way, more holistic overview of the season, and I think that's the way it has to be done at this point. Look towards the future. Where can you improve the standards on and off the pitch? Where can you improve the standards in the academy to make Leicester an attractive prospect? Because as much as I say Leicester need a top goal scorer, you need to be an attractive prospect to the club to bring in a goal scorer of that level. I think Michon could be it, but you need to keep her fit. So, and she needs support. And I think that's part of the challenge as well that Leicester have in terms of strikers. You've got players who can look lethal in front of goal at time. Can you support them properly? So yeah, I think it's been an interesting season so far for Leicester. I think they're doing, in terms of their placing in the table, better than a lot of people thought they would be. If you looked at the early matches, it's just a case of, I think, getting wins, however scrappy. If you need a 90+6 penalty save, that kind of win, I think will be the Foxes' bread and butter this season. And I think it's something that they just need to keep chipping away at.
No, I totally agree with you, Ellen. I think something that I touched on in the last episode with Kerry was what Rick Passmore said about identity. Yeah. And I think that's something that he's really instilled in the squad. I think we could see that at the weekend. It was scrappy at times, but there was a lot of intent going forwards. And Leicester only had 30% possession, but they made the decisions on the counter-attacks to keep that kind of attacking football, keep that front foot going forwards. And it resulted in a goal, whereas I think London City didn't take their chances. They weren't accurate. The likes of Isabel Goodwin, Nikita Paris. And yes, Leicester City can rely on the opposition mistakes, but I think because they had that tenacity, they had that kind of ferocity to go out there and lay out their identity on the pitch. I think that's what resulted in that win. So I totally agree with you there. And I think Rick Passmore has done well to instill that culture. And I think perhaps that's lacking in a few other teams across the league. I think you mentioned West Ham. West Ham have just sacked Rhian Skinner today. Yeah. And Liverpool have sort of struggled buying into Gareth Taylor's identity a little bit, I think. So I think that's somewhere where Leicester have differentiated themselves to the bottom of the table. And it's looking good going into January. In terms of the actual match, it's put a stop to their 8-game losing streak. But as you've so eloquently explained, it's not been that terrible of a season. There's been some real positives. The O'Brien goal, or scrap rather, I've put in my notes here, was an interesting one. But that's Shannon O'Brien's third goal in 4 matches. So perhaps where they are potentially, lacking that kind of clinical striker going forwards, we have got the likes of O'Brien to rely on and to get a result when we need it. First half, it was pretty careful, I think, from both teams. But in the second half, we had that goal and that amazing penalty save from Janina Leitzig. I mean, I'm sure you've been watching her throughout the season. Have you got a few words on the Leicester goalie for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, that Chelsea defeat, she was, if we could have put her as player of the match, I think we would have done, because she was exceptional. She was so good. And it is, I think Leicester found themselves in a really interesting position a couple of years ago when they had 2 really, high-class goalkeepers in Lisa Kopp and Janina Leitzig. And I think there had been sort of queries over, did Leicester sell the right player? And I think Janina Leitzig this season has proven that they've gambled and they've taken the right shot with Leitzig. She's a really class goalkeeper, great profile in terms of her statistics, the way she holds herself in goal, the presence that she has. I think we saw that against Manchester City as well. Couple of really class saves, and she's a great shot stopper. And that penalty save proves it. Kosovare Aslani, how many penalties are saved from her? She's a striker. Say a striker, she's, again, like a bit like a Yanis Gaiman. She's played all over. But she's a player who, she's the captain of Sweden. Her aura that she carries, the team she's played for, the reputation she holds is enough in itself. as a goalkeeper, when you see her step up to take the penalty, to send a bit of a shiver into your spine. So yeah, I think she's had a really solid season so far. I think just in terms of getting those clean sheets up, that would probably be the target for her. But she's held herself exceptionally well. And I think in terms of the defence, we were full of praise, me and Jane Ludlow, when in that Manchester City game. They stood so strong for so long, and it was just that one error from Celeste Boré, and then suddenly the floodgates open. And it is hard when you're playing that kind of football where you're going to be under pressure. You've already mentioned the possession statistics. That's tough football to play. It's very rarely sustainable. But I do think she's acquitted herself really well this season, and as maybe with the games that she's played against some of those bigger teams, really catapulted herself into the minds of more sort of household, watch the games when they're on the telly, football fans who maybe wouldn't have paid as much attention to her last season.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think also some other clubs come January will be looking at reinforcing their goalkeeping side. I know Arsenal, for one, will be looking. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but more to come on that later. So Ellen, we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into your career. I would love if you'd be able to tell the viewers a bit about where you started. I had the pleasure of listening to one of your podcasts last night that you did with the John Schofield Trust, which was very insightful. But I think the Fox 8 viewers would love if you could touch a little bit more about that. And also your kind of journey into the sport world.
Yeah, of course. So I grew up in a family that loves sport. I grew up in a really active family, and I'm so grateful for that. I was taken to my local football club, Peterborough United, when I was, I can't remember how old I'd have been for my first game. I probably 6 or 7. My grandpa took me, my brother. When my brother was born, I think everyone was like, yeah, got a boy to take to football. And my brother just hates football, doesn't want anything to do with it. So as the oldest grandchild, it fell on my shoulders to go with my grandpa. And I'm so grateful for that, because me and my little cousin, me and Daisy, used to go to the posh with my grandpa and her dad, and it was great. And so I always had like a real love for football. It was part of our family, it's part of our blood. And was playing at school, playing at primary school, and then when it got to secondary school, there was no football to play. It was girls do girls sports, boys do boys sports. Luckily enough for me, I was already doing a lot of athletics. My family really into sort of endurance sports, so cycling, running. I was already doing that, so just kept on with that, and always had a passion for radio. I think when I was in my last couple of years of primary school, I knew that I wanted to work in media, and I just felt that radio was my calling. So age 14, I contacted the local radio station and was like, let me in. I want to come and, I'd do anything, like make tea, watch people. And they actually had like a young broadcasters scheme. I was a little bit too young for it, but they got me on it anyway. And it all just sort of grew from there. I was taking time out of school once a week, just at the end of one of my lessons. I think it was physics. I'd like run down the street to get to the community radio station, present my show. Did that every year for 14 to 18, and then got some work experience at BBC Radio Cambridgeshire. As soon as I turned 18, I knew that they could employ me. So I was like, please let me come and make tea. I'll do anything. And luckily enough, the Peterborough office needed a broadcast assistant. So they offered me the job. I then had to go back to my school and say, really sorry, I'm not going to be able to do my English classes on a Wednesday and a Thursday because I've got to go, and I've been offered a job at the BBC. And thankfully my school was so helpful. My teachers helped with my schedule and ensured that I could go and work. So then after a year of doing that, when it came round to picking a university and what I wanted to do afterwards, it was a no-brainer for me. I walked straight into the BBC and was working full-time at BBC Radio Cambridgeshire, doing the weekends on the sports desk. But at local radio, you've got to pitch in everywhere. So I do the sports desk, I do stuff on the music show, BBC Introducing. I would do the Sunday morning faith show, just whatever was going. And then, so I did that until 2021, where I saw on LinkedIn. I think I was 21, sat on my floor because COVID had just happened and there was no real nightlife or anything for me to go out and do. And I saw a job come up as Manchester City's stadium announcer. So applied for it, got the job, got a transfer up to Manchester as well to work for 5 Live up there behind the scenes, balanced those two together for I think around 18 months, nearly 2 years, before deciding to go all in on freelance life after hosting the Women's Euros for UEFA in 2022. And yeah, I guess the rest is kind of history. Was on air for 5 Live for a while before deciding that commentary was more of my calling and put most of my eggs in that basket. Was commentating for the World Feed for the WSL. So a lot of sort of my early commentaries were going around the world rather than being heard here in England. And then I can't remember what happened. I'm trying to think of like what would be my first big like breakthrough in football. There was a lot of just like chipping away for a while, and I think that's probably been a partly a big story, like part of my story is just like having the patience and sort of chipping away until the last year. In terms of football, at the same time I was doing athletics commentary and went to the Olympic Games in 2024 as one of the World Feed commentators for both athletics and football. And then in the last 12 months, just had the honour of my first games for Sky, my first OB games for the BBC, like outside broadcast games, so like games that are controlled by the broadcaster. You're sort of the main voice that is then heard either by the BBC or Sky, and instead of doing the World Feed stuff, which is only heard internationally. And then got the call up to do the Women's Champions League final I think I got the call up maybe in March, April. Must have been April. Yeah, end of April, start of May, I got the call up to do the Champions League final. And that was just the most unbelievable experience. Being alongside Jen Beattie, calling the final is the biggest honour I think that I've had in my career. It was just incredible. Commentator of the Women's Euros, ended my Euros campaign on the quarterfinal between Italy and Norway, which was just an unbelievable game. Italy, just a team revived. It was incredible to watch. And then for them to go through and play England, I think was a beautiful story in terms of my own personal allegiances. And then came back after that and signed a contract with Sky as their WSL commentator. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the last 4 or 5 years. And as much as I say, I highlight some points there's so much that's gone on in the background and so much hard work that is linked to various other jobs that maybe I wouldn't come to the forefront of my memory to mention. But I do a lot outside of football still. I work on the biathlon, which is, for people who don't know, skiing and shooting combined. I think it's one of the best sports on the planet, and just like keeping that variety of sport is really key to me. But yeah, I think I've probably landed a pretty dream job being the commentator for Sky on the WSL. There's not much more I could ask for in life at this point.
Well, it's certainly my dream job, I'll tell you that. But no, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I hear this word variety touched upon a lot in the broadcasting world, and kind of making yourself as versatile as possible, especially within sport, but also in terms of everything, outside of sport as well, culture, news, politics, and all that. So what would you say is kind of your biggest piece of advice in terms of keeping yourself versatile? Yeah. When would you sort of specialize, or would you fall into that? Like you say, you kept chipping away. And also, just to touch upon, you didn't go to university, did you?
No.
So how important are sort of qualifications in the grand scheme of things? So a bit on versatility and then a bit on qualifications.
Yeah, I'll start with the versatility. I think it was always something that is pigeonholing is like such a big buzzword in the industry. And I remember pigeonholing just being this word that kind of floated around, and everyone was like, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself, and I was like, that's such a weird phrase. But I think like there's a couple of aspects that come into versatility. I think when I'm speaking to young broadcasters now, I would just say, you've got to just like take everything. I speak to a lot of people who are like, I want to be a commentator and that's all I want to do. And I'm like, that's great. But you at 20, me at 21, if I just decided I was going to be a commentator, I'd be broke. Like, there's no way that I could sustain that being like with very little commentary experience. Like, it's just the reality of it. So I think in terms of versatility, there's a bit of like, there is a slight bit of survival in there, in that you maybe know that you want to be a commentator. I didn't necessarily know that I wanted to be a football commentator at 21, because I was doing lots of different things as well. But it's also, I think, if I look back at the key points that have got me to where I am, being versatile, saying yes to everything, doing jobs that I didn't necessarily think were linked to my end goal, have been the best experiences that I've had. I was the broadcast assistant on the rugby team at 5 Live, and it was just such a great experience. I got experience every week of going to OBs during the Six Nations. I got to cover one of the biggest sporting events that happens every year, particularly obviously in Europe. And I just had a great time, and I got to do lots on the ground. I got to learn lots about being in teams. I got to meet people and just chat to people, and it was great. And if you'd have said rugby broadcast assistant to football commentator, the link might not be there, but it's more about the skills learned. Mm-hmm. And so I'd say that's such a key thing when it comes to versatility. As much as it might not be something on paper that you think necessarily will take you to the end goal, I promise you that there are skills there. And so I would really encourage young broadcasters not to try and jump that.
Yeah.
The best thing you can do is take your time, learn the skills. Particularly for me, you can tell now when people have come through the industry and have done the behind the scenes stuff, where they've worked as a broadcast assistant, a runner, where they've worked as a producer, it just gives you so much of a better grounding when you go to be on air. You understand how the show works, you understand how people get to different places, and what fits where. So for me, I think that's a really good bit of versatility in terms of people's career progressions, but also for me, it's just great for me mentally. I love having the versatility. I love having the variety of work. I love that I can be doing, this week I do biathlon for 4 days, and then I've got 4 League Cup games on Sunday. And so it's just having that ability to chop and change, and things stay exciting and things stay fresh. I think for me, I really love. It's not for everyone. There's people who are like, I just want to be a football commentator and I just want to work on football, and that's absolutely fine. Or people who just want to work in cycling, or people who just want to work in athletics, and that's great. I do think, though, if you've got a passion for lots of sports and you've grown up in lots of sports, use that, have fun with it, because I've learned so much from biathlon commentary in particular that I now take into my football commentary, and vice versa. And so, what my main takeaway would be: don't rule things out because you don't think it's relevant. Say yes to everything as much as you can, obviously. Grab stuff, and don't discard work that you don't think will get you to the end goal, because you never know who you're going to meet along the way.
Brilliant. Love that. That's very great advice, especially for aspiring broadcasters like myself. So thank you. Let's have a little bit of a chat about the January transfer window then, just to bring it back to the football. Where do you see Leicester wanting to reinforce themselves? Who do you think we could bring in? I saw something really funny, actually. Someone said that they'd like Stina Blackstenius to come in, and I thought, well, that would be ideal to have someone pushing forwards, running the lines like that. Although perhaps we want them to be onside a little bit more. But where do you see Leicester reinforcing in January?
Yeah, I mean, I think a goal scorer like Stina Blackstenius is someone who can hit on the counter, someone who's got pace. So when you look at the height and the cadence that Stina Blackstenius has, she can split defences, she can run. I think that's the kind of player that you want to look at based on your current style of play. And I think Naomi Michon can do that. And I think getting her the best support, putting players around her, it's really hard to say who Leicester will bring in. I've recently written a piece and I've been quite avoidant on players that Leicester could bring in terms of naming names. The January window is so tricky, right? The January window, if you're looking for a striker, it's the hardest time to go out and buy a striker. Chelsea worked some absolute magic in 2024 to bring in Myra Ramirez after Sam Kerr did her ACL, and how they found a player of that caliber in that window who was playing in Europe and not Europe and Scandinavia, but playing in a team who was halfway through Levante's season when they bought her. Instead of the strikers that you see move this time of year usually are Scandinavian strikers, those who've been playing in the NWSL because their seasons have come to an end. So I wouldn't be surprised, based off the players already in the squad, that maybe have certain links to Scandinavia, if Leicester do explore the Scandinavian market. I think everyone explores the Scandinavian market this time of year because that's where players are available. That's where you can look for players. Outside of that, I think loan moves probably the way forward. I think these temporary moves where you can get players in, even if it's, I think ideally it would be with a longer term vision, looking maybe, I know there's not as much of these options or obligations to buy as there are in the men's game, but looking at players who you could maybe bring on loan and then sign on a permanent over summer would be ideal in terms of the longer term vision. Rick Passmore's spoken a lot about the academy, and I think that's where growth needs to happen as well, attracting players into the academy setup so they don't have to buy players. That's something that Rick Passmore has said himself, and I think it's somewhere where lots of teams have been lagging over the course of the last couple of years. You look at Chelsea and you look at Arsenal, and they have some really accomplished academies there where they don't just feed their own teams, they feed other teams. You look at the players that have come through Arsenal in particular, who have come through at the younger level. I'm not always saying academy players, because I know particularly like Chloe Kelly did a lot of her work at QPR before she was moved over to Arsenal and then obviously up north. But to be able to do that and then call on players, make money from players, I think that's somewhere where the teams have to move. And Leicester has such a big catchment area. When I was growing up in Peterborough, a lot of the footballers that I knew or that was aware of in Peterborough, female footballers, they were playing for Leicester City because that was the closest club. It was easy to get to. If you look at the range that Leicester have, I think it's really a solid academy setup in that area. You can draw in a lot of talent, and you've got a really good base there. So I would say, as much as work needs to be done to bring in players and attract players, Leicester need to make sure they've got an attractive prospect on and off the pitch to bring the players in. It's something that Rick Passmore has spoken about a lot. So for me, the work that needs to be done, I wouldn't be surprised, particularly this season, with Leicester's position in the league coming into the January window. Also, the fact that only one team will go into that relegation playoff, I wouldn't be surprised if this is a quiet window for Leicester. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because I think money might be best spent going into developing the setup, making Leicester an attractive prospect. If you can bring players in on loan this window to try and make sure that if Liverpool with Beata Olsen, a very different prospect, now she's in form in comparison to Liverpool at the start of the season. Who knows who's going to come in at West Ham? That could change things in the same way that Martin Ho has changed Spurs from the team that finished 11th last season and are now, battling close to the top. So I think Leicester need to do enough in this window to stabilise, ensure that they're not going to slip close to that 12th place and the relegation playoff. But also, I wouldn't be surprised if the energy is spent looking at the situation. Now you've got a permanent coach in, looking at what Rick Passmore wants to see around the club more holistically. That's the word he's used, it more holistic. Look at the club, look at the training ground, that kind of thing, to ensure that they are an attractive prospect when money needs to be spent in summer, that you can put the money into getting a top class striker or a playmaking midfielder who can support the striking talent that you've already got.
I totally agree. It's such great insight. And, I definitely agree with you in terms of the academy and building from the ground up. I think having a quiet window, like you say, is a good idea. And we've got players like Missy Goodwin coming back into the setup. We've got Olivia McLaughlin, who's been in good form.
She's exceptional. She looks so good against
amazing.
City. She was everywhere, and it's, as much as I say, you know, bringing in a playmaking midfielder, it's also getting the best out of those players, giving them the confidence to link play better through the midfield, find those gaps in the defenses of the teams. You know, you look at as much as, you know, I've mentioned it a few times, that goal Michel scored against Arsenal. You know, if you can get more players running off the shoulder, if you can get more players, you know, threatening centre backs. Jota Olsen has said it herself, you know, this season, you know, when she eyed up the goal against Chelsea, the equalising goal, which then stood and has put Chelsea in the position they are chasing now. They, you know, she was like, the centre backs were slow, and I knew I could run through them. You've got, you know, as much as you've got the experience in the likes of Kaiman, there is also the youngsters that you've mentioned, the players who can run off the shoulder, the players who have the pace. And part of it is just giving them confidence. And I do really think, listening to Rick Passmore, listening in that Manchester City game, the first half was like a training session for them. They had to sit back and defend, but you could hear every word he said. We could
so vocal.
You could hear everything. You know, I was like, do we even need to commentate? Because he was giving, you know, he was telling and, you know, shouting at the players, telling them where to go. And I think that's really interesting to see that he's hopefully through that, if that's the kind of way they like to be coached, he's giving them the confidence, and he was really vocal in praising them when they'd done things well, trying to correct movements, trying to put them in the right position when he wasn't as happy with things. But I think hearing the praise, I was like, let's, you know, if Leicester can keep that going, I think it'll be really interesting to see how the confidence grows and grows. And, you know, like I said, Leicester looking at the table in a much better position than I think a lot would have predicted at the start of the season, and that coming back off the winter break should give them a lot of confidence.
Definitely, and having a head coach that demands performances from you is so important. And as much as it was shocking to have the change in kind of leadership at the start of the season, I think the Foxes have done really well, and I think that win really solidified that. And I think going into January, into the rest of the season, hopefully we can see a lot more of that front-footed, that intensity, that want to win, that belief, never say die, all of this that's helped keep other teams at bay. Teams like London City Lionesses, who have a star-studded squad, but are sort of left to their own devices a bit by Jocelyn Pressure. So having a head coach that demands that of you, I think, is so good. And I think everything you've touched upon is absolutely, I'm in agreement, and I'm sure the rest of the viewers of this episode will agree with you too. Thank you so much, Ellen, for coming on this show. It's been a delight to have you on, and to hear all of your fantastic insight. I don't think we'll ever get such an in-depth view of the WSL, but you, of course, you have to be knowledgeable. It's your job. You have to know all the ins and outs. So thank you for that insight. And I hope you've enjoyed your time with us.
It's been brilliant. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. And thank you to Counterpress, as always, for our new partnership. The launch is January 1st, and I hope to see lots of sign-ups. The sign-up link is in the YouTube description.